Heads up, it's the Roll Jays podcast, the voice of the Creighton basketball fan. With your hosts, Jimmy Allen, Alex Drake, and Casey Matthews. Join the crew and meet CU players, coaches, and a whole lot more. Now, the Roll Jays podcast. Here's Jimmy Allen.
Welcome into the Roll Jays podcast, brought to you by Pixel Fire Marketing and Pyramid Contractors. Jimmy Allen and Alex Drake with you here on what is now a Tuesday night, but you'll be watching this on a Wednesday morning. A lot of things going on in Jays land despite the season being over. A couple of key targets on campus, and Josh Dix and Nick Graves. We're going to talk about how important each of them would be to the addition of Greg McDermott's team. And obviously, Creighton's already found its heir apparent to Ryan Kalkbrenner. Owen Freeman, the Iowa transfer, has committed to the Jays. What does that leave for the roster? What does this team still need? Even if they strike out on Josh Dix and Nick Graves, we'll get to all of that. We're also going to discuss the one and open coaching spot left by Ryan Miller and his departure to Murray State, and what it looks like by the fact that the Jays have not made a decision as far as that goes. And obviously, Alex, this is a big weekend in the coaching world with the Final Four happening in San Antonio, and we'll see how that shakes out. That's what we're going to talk about today and cover here on the Roll Jays podcast. As you can see by the new layout, if you haven't heard, we have affiliated ourselves with the Big East Energy Podcast Network. Super excited to work with Mark and the UConn team. If you are a podcast host of a different Big East school other than UConn and Creighton, we are looking to add to the roster. So if you are interested in joining the Big East Energy Network, we are taking applications at this time for the other 6 schools in the Big East. Would love to talk to you about contributing to our network. But Alex, we'll start with the on-campus visits, and obviously 2 big names that we brought up. Josh Dix from Iowa, who obviously has ties to Owen Freeman, who's already committed to Creighton. Looks like there may be a tie in there, but really interesting. There's still 2 other Big Ten schools highly sought after, or looking after Josh Dix in Illinois, Illinois or
Indiana.
Indiana. I was like, it's the other high school. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
So you would assume that the correlation with Owen Freeman would automatically tie those 2 together, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. This does not seem like a package deal.
No, I don't think it is at all. For a variety of reasons. I mean, I think in the football world you see it more often where you get a couple of guys from the same school transfer to the same school together. I don't really remember too many basketball scenarios of that. And I know everything we're hearing is it's down to Creighton and Illinois, but I wouldn't count Indiana out just yet. They have 1 player on their roster as of today, and that is Tucker DeVries, Darian DeVries' son. Man, I wish I had more information on what kind of relationship Josh Dix has with Darian DeVries. With Darian DeVries being in Omaha so long and Josh Dix being a Council Bluffs kid, but then also DeVries being at Drake for a long time, and yeah. I'm sure he tried to recruit him before he committed to Iowa, being another Iowa school. Obviously, you're going to lose out on that one at Drake most of the time. But I think Josh Dix would be a huge get, 6'6" guard, shoots the ball well, big, strong guard. That's something that you and I have both kind of talked about that we want to see Creighton get a little bit more of is some size at the guard position. Now, Josh Dix isn't a point guard, and that's where we really hammered it home. But
he'll kind of be filling that Jemiah Neal-esque role where it would be a 2 guard. And another guy that is really interesting that did a Zoom call with Creighton earlier this week is Tyrone Riley, the USF guard as well, who's also almost exact same dimensions as Jemiah Neal, not quite as athletic and not as quite as bulky, but also another 6'6" guard and a freshman.
Yeah, I really like going to get some more length. You already have Owen Freeman, who's 6'10". I don't know his exact wingspan, but he looks a lot longer on the court than just 6'10", which is hard to do. But then you also have Jackson McAndrew, who provides some good length. Ty Davis is a decent sized guard as well. But no shots at Ty Davis. We're big fans of Ty Davis on this show, but I just don't think Ty Davis has quite gotten to the point where he's ready to run the show yet either. And hopefully next year you get a guy for him to work with instead of just being a spot minute guy.
Well, I think it's really interesting, especially with Tyrod Riley coming from University of San Francisco, not to be confused with USF, University of South Florida. I think it's really interesting that you talked about how big Owen Freeman looks, but he's 6'10", 245, and he's going to be playing the same position Ryan Kalkbrenner was at 7'2", 270. Clearly two completely different body types, two completely different people, right? And when we talked to Ryan last week, he mentioned, whoever comes after me, don't try to be me, try to be you. And it kind of feels like the coaching staff is attempting to kind of take that same moniker as well, right? Like they're going out and they're not getting another version of Ryan Kalkbrenner. They're going out and getting somebody differently. We've seen Creighton run this drop coverage defense for the last 3 years because of Ryan Kalkbrenner. Now it seems like now that they know that they don't have the ability to have a 7'2" rim protector that doesn't ever foul, they're taking a completely different approach to the defensive side of the basketball, where they're just going to go out and get some really big guards and try to play maybe a little bit more man or zone and change up the way they've been doing things. And when you have guys like Isaac Trout that is 6'10", yeah, I agree with you. I don't think Ty Davis is quite ready to be the starting point guard yet, but he does have some length. And that's kind of been the one discussion that you and I personally have had over the last 4 years about when you replace Ryan Nembhard, a 6'1" guard, with a Steven Ashworth that's a 6-foot guard. It still left a lot to be desired on the defensive side of the basketball, and it kind of feels like that's something Creighton doesn't want to have a discussion about anymore.
Yeah, I mean, in Steven Ashworth's defense too, right? I mean, he ended up being a really good plus defender, chasing guys off screens.
Absolutely.
But two, I think it's just more of who's in the portal when, right? Like, you don't always. I look at some other in-state schools last year who struggled in the portal, but it wasn't I didn't think last year was a phenomenal portal class to go out and elevate a lot of teams. This
Sure.
year, I think there's a lot more talent in the portal. But going back to Owen Freeman, one of the most impressive things for me about Owen Freeman, I think he is at a younger age more well-rounded offensively than Ryan Kalkbrenner. He also has a phenomenal field goal percentage, but in a totally different system. He's not catching as many lobs at the rim as Ryan did at that age in his career. But additionally, for 2 straight years, he's averaged 1.8 blocks a game. So,
and I want to make sure, because I don't think we've mentioned Owen Freeman was a sophomore this year. He'll be a junior heading in next season.
Yep. And so I think you're still going to see drop coverage, but to the point that you're making is that drop coverage. Sometimes we let a couple of bigs get going because we didn't have the guards to necessarily fight through the screens or contest coming off that screen. Like they hopefully will if they get a couple of these bigger guards. I'd tell you what, Nick Graves at 6'3", average 17 plus at Charlotte. I like his game a lot. I spent a little bit of time watching his film today,
and he's going to run the point if he's that great.
Yeah. I think he's a little bit of a difference maker. I don't want to disrespect Casey's guy, but he has a little bit of Marcus Zagorowski in him.
I agree.
Not the same guy. Not even the same. I don't want to say they play the same style, but they have a lot of the same tools.
And he's got a little bit of an edge to him. And I think that's something this program sorely is going to need next year, without a lot of questions at what leadership is going to look like next season. Because it's really easy to say, right? And we're going to get in this in a position needs, but it's really easy to say this is going to be Jax McAndrews' team next year. Well, Jax McAndrews is going to be a true sophomore. And you're talking about recruiting some guys that are upperclassmen and are coming in from being leaders in their program as well.
Yeah. I still think, this team offensively is probably going to be carried by how much Jackson improves at various parts of his game, right? Like, I think that's going to be a huge part of it. But at the same token, you have to get a guard that can run this system. We've seen problems there. So I think I keep going back to the Steven Ashworth quote on senior night. Mac, you love us for who we are, but you don't let us stay the same way. Yeah. And so everybody that the staff is going after, they love what they bring to the table, but they also have a vision for where they can take them and where that player can take this team. And the perfect example of a guy that made some massive strides was Jemiah Neal this year.
100%.
And I think his success story is a lot easier to sell than maybe Steven Ashworth's was.
Well, and I think the one key component there, because, and not to keep bearing the lead about stuff we're going to talk about, is the way Trey Ziegler was able to get Jemiah Neal to buy in. Now, Trey Ziegler is the guy recruiting Nick Graves too, to your point a second ago. And if you're if you're a Trey Ziegler who looks at somebody like Jemiah Neal's mental state coming into Creighton a year ago, where it was not all the way bought in, self-admittedly by Jemiah. Trey agreed with him as well, and it took him a while to get there. You can have the conversation that we went and got this kid from Arizona State, from a Power 4 or Power 5 school, got him to come here. He wasn't bought all the way in. He had some early on success, but when it came to bigger level competition, he struggled a little bit. And then when he finally started to see how things worked here, and that when you follow the system, it'll benefit you, maybe, and you hope that's enough to get you over, but you're still going to have some really high level athletes that have egos when they come in. And I don't know Nick Graves personally. I don't know Josh Dix personally either. And I'm not saying that either one of them do, but to play basketball at this high of a level, you got to have a little bit of an ego, and it's going to take a while for those guys to buy in or maybe believe in the process a little bit. But I think Trey Ziegler, in year 2 of being an actual assistant at Creighton, having the experience with a guy who really took under his wing and made his guy in Jemiah, and maybe being able to do that with a Nick Graves or Josh Dix may help as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember this conversation that we had with Trey going into the season last year. I remember it sticks out to me all the time. We talked to him about Jemiah when they brought him in, and one of the things he talked about is, when Jemiah came in on his recruiting trip, we watched a lot of his film, and we didn't think he was a bad shooter. We thought he was taking bad shots.
Yeah,
and you
could say maybe about the first 10 games of the season as well.
Yeah, and even late in the year, sometimes he reverted back to old habits. But I think the success story that is Jemiah Neal gives you a leg up in recruiting. And we have touched on the greatness of Mac and the greatness of this staff and their ability to just always keep plugging away and continuing to have success. I think as a fan base, I am as guilty of this as anybody, Jimmy. And I was thinking about it before we got on here. Not only do we take for granted the success that we've had transferring to the Big East, we've taken even more for granted in terms of Mac and the staff's success in the transfer portal.
Yeah, let's go to the coaching position needs too, because I think that makes it a really interesting discussion too. And because when you look at what is leaving in Ryan Miller, he was kind of the top recruiter for the staff. Now, Greg McDermott obviously was involved in all of the recruiting, and Jemiah, Steven, Isaac, Baylor, all of them had talked about, we were recruited by certain coaches, but Mac was kind of the closer, if you will, or maybe the last guy that decided that was the deciding factor in bringing those guys in. But Ryan Miller was a big part of a lot of those discussions. He's the reason Pop Isaacs came here. He was obviously heavily involved in the Arthur Kaluma and Ryan Nemhard acquisitions as well. And obviously those guys left, but those are some really big names that Ryan Miller was able to convince to come to Omaha and be a part of this program for at least a season or two or more. And you're losing a guy that brings in that level of talent. And obviously his connection to the NBA and everything like that helps a ton. But who you get in that spot to fill that need is really interesting to me. Now, there's a million rumors out there about Alan Huss maybe coming back and the coach in waiting, and that brings up a whole nother conversation about how much longer do we have Greg McDermott for, and whose team is this really this year? But
seems like a conversation we have way more frequently than we should, by the way.
But hold on, because I don't think that's true, because that's kind of almost a little self-inflicted by Mac, just a little bit, right? I mean,
no, 100%. But what I'm saying, and I think you would agree. Tell me to kick rocks if you don't.
Kick rocks.
But I think at this point, we should just be celebrating every moment we have with Mac instead of fearing the unknown of if and when he decides his time is up.
Yeah. I would agree with you any other year other than this year because of what you're losing on the court, right? Like, I think a lot of the reason everybody was like, well, if Mac leaves, that kind of sucks, but, we still have Ryan Kalkbrenner. We still have, whoever the point guard was at the time. And certain people felt like maybe heading into Baylor and Trey's last year, you still have those two guys also. but this is probably the biggest question mark from a roster standpoint, and almost specifically because you don't have Ryan Kalkbrenner, that really you've had in 5 or 6 years. And
I'd go back 10. I'd
Yeah,
go back from the first year of the Big East.
Yeah, I was being very generous, but there's just so many things that you need on the court that it's so imperative off the court that Greg McDermott's here. And listen, there may have been a discussion before this season about him not coming back for next season, but the fact is, this would probably be the worst possible time. And to your point, since Creighton joined the Big East, for him to leave this program.
Yeah, I think where I come from, and this is not to disparage anybody, but I do remember probably around 7 or 8 years ago, very early on in the Big East tenure, before Mac had ever gotten out of the second weekend with Creighton, which, by the way, no coach had ever done. There was a small contingent of fans of like, when do we move on? And now I say very small contingent, but they were loud. And I think I'm just at the point where I rather appreciate it than think about when that happens.
Right.
Because I think in sports, Jimmy, I was guilty of this with Kobe Bryant. And probably for a good part of LeBron James's career too, where I didn't appreciate the greatness as it was happening in front of me. And that's the mindset I have right now with Mac. I really want to appreciate the job that he's done. We said it all season. This is probably the best coaching job he's ever done, at least with Creighton.
And this year coming up is going to have to probably double that too, right? And
yeah,
a lot of that work's being done right now. And the reason I brought up this weekend at the start of this episode was because a ton of coaches go to the Final Four for meetings and networking and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And part of me is a little surprised that position, the coaching position that is being left open by Ryan Miller, hasn't been decided already. But the other part of me is like, but the Final Four is this weekend, and maybe whoever that guy is at the Final Four. Maybe not necessarily coaching on one of the 4 teams left staff, but going to be there to finalize some things and maybe have a discussion with Greg McDermott as well.
Yeah, I think that's a realistic possibility. I heard somebody on the radio this week, and we've talked about it privately. Is Mitch Ballack a guy that can fill that position? And do I think Mitch Ballack could fill that position and do a fine job at it? I do. I really do. Talking to him about basketball, savant is a word I would use to describe Mitch. Agreed. But on the flip side, the lack of experience is really hard to sell that. So
especially for what you need out of this recruiting class.
Yeah. So if Mitch is getting the first crack at that, I think Mac is, making him develop essentially a business plan as to why it should be his.
Sure.
And what's he going to do. So that being said too, Mac has always filled the positions on that staff with coaches that he trusts and that seem to get the job done. And I'm not entirely sold on the fact that everybody on staff today is still going to be on staff after this weekend. Like, I just think there's so much movement happening right now. You just had Buzz Williams leave for Maryland. Like somebody else could get plucked. Now there are some mainstays on that staff that are not going anywhere. Murph, Lou, Johnny, those guys are obviously not going anywhere. They've been here for over 10 years. You feel really good about them, but
yeah, and
does a Derek Kellogg go home where his family still lives? Who knows?
I was just about to say I would highly disagree with you. The only guy that I would even maybe consider would be DK, and he told us on the radio, it was nice to go back to New York because I got to see all my family. And I don't think Patino's got an opening in St. John's or anything, but it's I think I would be surprised if we saw Jahin's Manigat, for anybody that doesn't know, go with Ryan Miller to Murray State. But it kind of feels like if there was going to be anybody else that went to join that staff, they would have probably already went by now. And we talked about the possibility of Derek Kellogg taking a spot on that staff too. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I think I will be surprised if there if everybody that is on staff right now isn't on staff next year. except for maybe a Mitch Ballock if he doesn't get this role and ends up getting an assistant job elsewhere. But I truly believe that, and this is absolutely no disrespect to Mitch. This is just his tenure or lack thereof in the coaching industry. Like, I think if it is Mitch, I think they've probably gotten a couple of no's, or maybe not no's, maybe not right nows to fill that spot.
Yeah, I could see that, but I've seen crazy things happen in this coaching carousel, and a school that's kind of been our Achilles heel for plucking assistants is Purdue.
Yeah.
First it was Steve Lutz, then it was Paul Lusk, and with some of these openings, Paul Lusk is going to be on a lot of people's lists to go get either a top assistant or potentially in line for a head coaching job here soon.
That's a good point.
Alan Huss might end up with an upgraded job here soon if he doesn't come back to Creighton or whatever it might be. Like, there's a lot of things that could still happen. And so I'm not ready to say one way or the other where we're going to land. What I am willing to say is I feel very comfortable with whatever decision Mac ultimately makes.
Sure. And that brings us kind of to our roster needs segment too. Here is when we talk about what this team needs and how much they're going to need to attract. I think a lot of the reasons you're hearing Nick Graves, Josh Dix, and Tyrone Riley, the fourth being rumored to Creighton, is there's a chance they're not just going to add the guys that they need in starting roles. They may be adding some guys that they need in backup roles as well. When obviously Mason Miller was one of your backups a year ago, he's gone. Pop Isaacs was penciled in as your starter, but was almost a non-factor after game number 8. Not almost, was a non-factor after game 8. He's gone. And Fred, your backup center. So not only do you need to add Owen Freeman, you need to add a backup to Owen Freeman as well. And they only have one true freshman coming in through the transfer portal too in Hudson Greer. So, or through the freshman recruiting ranks. So what does that other backup position look like? And that's a really interesting one to me to fill through the transfer portal, because a lot of those guys, the majority of those guys, the reason that they're in the portal is they're looking for more playing time.
Yeah, and this is no shots at Owen Freeman, but you have to get a backup center that you can count on for minimum 10 to 15 minutes a game until Owen Freeman proves that he can play 30 plus, right? Like,
yeah,
you don't have Ryan Kalkbrenner back there, so you have to not only get a backup center, but you have to get a backup center that you can count on for a little bit more production than you got out of Fred King. And no shots at Fred King's. We were big fans of Fred King. It just, everything was so different when Ryan was off the floor that it was hard to find him minutes. You don't have Ryan anymore. And I wish I had done this earlier, but I'm going to pull up Owen Freeman's stats at Iowa right now.
What are you trying to figure out?
How many minutes he averaged per game over his career?
So 2 years ago, he averaged 22.8 minutes. Last year, he averaged 26.4. So he averaged 24 minutes a game. Ryan Kalkbrenner,
so you need 16 minutes.
Yeah. Ryan Kalkbrenner averaged 36. not exactly the same. And if I had to guess, Jeremy Anderson's going to ask him to add some weight, which may take some more minutes off his legs as well. So you may be actually looking for 2 backup centers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate that. Now, we talked about this after the last game of the year. Do they look at changing things defensively a little bit? And if you change things defensively a little bit, does that change your roster rotation? Does that put an Isaac Trout playing small ball 5 a little bit more frequently, even though that's not necessarily something he wants to do? Who knows?
Totally change his trajectory from where he's been the last 2 years, by the way.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm cautiously optimistic about what this roster is going to look like next year in the rotation. It seems to me, to your point, Jimmy, that they're out hunting not just guys to fill roster spots, guys that can do a variety of things and to deepen this bench. I mean, we've talked about it. Guys appear to be tired towards the end of the year at times because we haven't had a bench.
38 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't had, but this year I would say the bench provided depth. The problem with that was the majority of the depth was at 2 positions. And you really had 3 guys playing 2 spots, and then one of those three guys got inserted into a starting role that wasn't his natural position either, and that he had never played. And you still almost made it to the Sweet 16. You ended up getting blown out by Auburn towards the end of that game, but you still, we agreed that team overachieved.
Blown out by the number one team in the country. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not like you're playing a group of slouches.
But you were up at halftime. You played a solid game. I would say you ran out of gas a little bit, and you were somewhat limited because you had a couple of guys playing out of position, and so I like where this roster appears to be headed.
Yeah, the one thing that's really interesting to me for guys like Tyrone Riley IV, and maybe to some degree Josh Dix, is when you look at, I guess Josh Dix is a junior, so maybe not. Like when you look at revenue sharing, right? The teams in the Big East are going to have a little bit of a luxury of having the ability of having probably more additional revenue sharing than teams in the Big Ten, in the SEC, and the Big 12, because they don't have to pay football teams. So the vast majority of your revenue sharing ability is going to come from your men's basketball programs, and for some schools, probably like Creighton, your women's basketball revenue sharing. So for guys that are freshmen / sophomores or maybe red shirts, I really wonder how much that discussion is being had. Like, hey, we can't front load this deal, but we can really backload this deal on top of giving you outside NIL money as well. As opposed to, hey, if you're looking at Iowa or Indiana or Illinois or Indiana, yeah, they might be able to front load it right now, but if you're going to plan on being here for 2 years, that money might slightly decrease, and they can't control that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. The revenue share is going to totally, I don't want to say restructure how we look at NIL today, but it is. It's going to change things. And, I've said it for a long time too. I still think there's some form of a market correction coming in this world. In NIL, I don't think there's going to be like salary caps, but I think some of the money is going to get pulled back a little bit because I don't know what kind of ROI some of these businesses are getting when they're signing these deals.
I wonder how many of them care.
That's fair.
I mean, we see companies all the time try to check because their logo's next to something. Thank you to Pixel Fire Marketing and Pyramid Contractors for sponsoring the show. And they're not like that. But I mean, there's several, there are certain entities in Omaha that I know sell ads to those places that provide sporting events. People just do it to see their banner out in left field or on a scoreboard somewhere. And that's probably what a lot of these companies do. They're probably alumni or whatever. But to your point, money's getting tight for a lot of people right now. And if that's the case, I mean, there's got to be that. My thing, though, and not to make this political, but my thing is I don't see any way you could put the toothpaste back in the tube. From a state, and I know everybody wants to talk about amateur model and student athletes, and in the 40s, all they got was a scholarship and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or whatever we want to say. There's no other walk of life where what your value is deteriorated because of what you do, right? Like, if
we're
100%. We're talking about market value. If somebody wants to pay Alex Drake to be a podcast host $1 million a year to be a podcast host, that's your market value. It can't be determined by Congress or whoever else because of where you attend school. Like, if you're in the marching band at Creighton and Metallica recruits you and wants to pay you $30 million, the fact that you go to Creighton University does not deter the fact that you're going to get that money. So I just don't know how. And listen, the NCAA is just losing hand over fist every time they go to court. So all somebody has to do is say, "We'll just sue you." You know what's going to happen? They're going to win because this.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying this is going to come down from the NCAA. What I'm saying is the people donating all of this money. And specifically at schools where they're hunting for titles, right? Like that, you got, let's take Michigan football for example, right? Dave Portnoy and another couple. What do they pay? $5 million for a quarterback?
Whether you believe Dave Portnoy had anything to do with that or not, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My point is You're not going to
You
do
probably
that.
guess where I stand on that.
Yeah, you're not going to do that every year, though. Eventually,
Right.
that money is going to get pulled back, and that's where I think this market correction is going to come. And I don't know how long it'll be, but I don't think you're going to see 8 guys with $800,000 a year deals on a college basketball team. And
I
I'm
don't
not
either.
saying that you have that happen right now. I'm just saying, like, some of the money is going to get pulled back by the people donating.
And I wasn't specifically talking about the point you made, but I've heard a lot of people talk about salary caps and things like that. Well, the problem with that is the reason you have salary caps in major sports is you have a players' union. Well, the reason you have a players' union is because you have constant representation from those people. You know what happens? Well, pre-pandemic, every 4 to 5 years, you have new players on your roster, and the only way you could prevent that from changing year to year is if you have freshmen represent you for 4 years. And I don't think anybody wants that. So there's so
No,
many.
but you and I talked about it this week too. I think, and this probably goes into another show. We don't have to touch on this too much, but I think if you really want to, like, the biggest gripe with NIL, Jim, and you do a lot more in this world than I do in terms of taking phone calls and tweets about it. But I think most people's gripe is revolving around the transfer portal, right? And I think one way to help that is, I've long stood on taking out independent agents to a degree. Obviously, the player still needs some form of representation, but I'd argue there's too much, too many agents. But at least change those deals, because my understanding is the agents at the college level are getting 10% versus the pros are getting like 3%. So there has to be maybe the word I'm looking for is more protection for the players.
Well,
because I think a lot of guys are transferring and getting hurt.
That's been the case forever, though, right? Like that's been the argument forever, and that was the biggest argument against when Reggie Bush lost his Heisman. Was like, are we really punishing this kid for protecting himself and his family? Because it kind of feels like what we're doing here. And it just it's so funny because so many people are looking at these athletes now as semi-professionals or professionals, and a lot of them are signing these deals when they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And you have states like Missouri and Georgia, Missouri already, who has that the law in place that could pay their student athletes NIL before they even leave high school. And Georgia's trying to implement that. And I think that's coming to probably all the lower 48 sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And, I can't say that you shouldn't be able to do that, right? Like, I look at all these high school kids. You and I were high school kids at one point, and
100 years ago.
If you want to be really good at your craft, it takes a lot of dedication. And if you're a multi-sport athlete, it's really hard to hold a job that allows you to be a functional adult at the high school age. And so I don't hate that idea.
No, I don't either. And I think I'm one of the very few that have no problem with the way it is now. And I think it's sustainable. I just don't think a lot of people with a lot of money like it, because they have to pay current, technically non-employees that they never had to pay before to get the same enjoyment out of it. And like, are we really complaining about the schools that make millions of dollars and the NCAA who makes billions of dollars? The fact that they're going to make a little less money, like, is that really the argument that we're having?
Especially when NCAA is supposed to be a nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
I think, I'm with you. I don't have a problem with the way it is in the grand scheme of things. I personally believe that maybe this is me being cynical, right? I see it a lot in my day job. I think there are a lot of people out there being taken advantage of because other people see a money grab.
Yep.
And that's where I want the protections put in. And for me, it starts with the agents. And maybe I have a fundamental misunderstanding of how that process is working right now. And if I do, I'll eat crow. But I look at it in my day job, and I think there's a lot of people that get taken advantage of in the real estate industry by a variety of people that work in that industry.
I just think that shows you that people across the world just get taken advantage of, right?
Yeah, 100%. But for me, like, these are kids, and I think we need to do a better job of making them take financial classes, so financial well-being classes, whatever you want to call it, both in high school and college. I think that should be mandatory. It would solve a lot more problems. But also, I think the guidelines around these agents need to be a little bit more rigorous. So we are making sure the product, right? At the end of the day, this is about the product of the sport, is protected.
Well, and I think it's not like these are just opinions, though, right? Say what you want about Jaden Rashada, and I think I have a lot more questions about him now than I did when he allegedly got told by Florida they would have X amount of money for him that they didn't have, because obviously the situation with him in Georgia. But I think, and this is football, it's not basketball, but I think about a kid like Matthew Saluka, the quarterback from UNLV, that quit mid-season because he wasn't getting what he was promised.
Yep.
And essentially said, I'm not going to be taken advantage of. And if you can't deliver on what you promised me, I'm not putting pads on Saturdays. Now, we haven't seen anything remotely close to that in the college basketball world that I can remember, at least since the transfer portal and NIL became
at least not publicly.
Yeah, exactly. Which are two very obviously high profile teams, UNLV because the run they were on early in the season, and Florida being Florida. But there's a lot of question marks around a lot of things, and I think the one thing, if we're gonna fix the NIL and the transfer portal, I think we just need universal rules. Like, if it's gonna be the Wild West, just come out and say, listen, coaches can make phone calls, you can send tweets, you can. And that's the other thing, is like with the recruiting stuff and tampering and all that, like even at the college basketball level, like it's different now. And yes, you can call it tampering, but like for football coaches that have been around for 20 years or basketball coaches that have been around for 30 years to come out and say, oh, well, this is tampering. Well, no, it's just the world's different now. You have access to every single human being by the device that's in your pocket. That wasn't the case in 93. So
well, yeah, and I also think I thought this for a long time. I thought it was stupid that you had recruiting dead periods. If the kid wants to talk to you, he wants to talk to you.
And more importantly, I think we should be doing that. Maybe it's a little excessive. No, you don't need to send him a pair of shorts through the mail every single day. That's a little excessive, but like sometimes these kids don't have a lot of parental guidance or people in their lives, and that's why agents can come in and take advantage of them. But if you have coaches that are doing things the right way, and there are some out there that aren't, I don't want to pretend like there aren't, but if you have coaches that are doing things the right way and mentoring these kids, you have kids that don't even go to school or play for coaches that still talk to that coach because of the relationship that they built while they were recruiting them. And taking that away from some of these kids could be a detriment. I think it's a lot of the reason we see kids who are very highly sought after or highly recruited make bad decisions during recruiting dead periods because they don't have that outlet or that positive role model bounce things off of.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous point. And to build off of it too, like I think my fear around the agents and these kids is eventually we're going to get to a world where, especially as revenue share comes, where the majority of the conversation and communication is going to be through the agent. And that's what I don't want. That's what I don't want.
I think we're very close to that right now. Hey, we touched on a lot of things tonight and got off the topic of Creighton basketball. We appreciate everybody that joined us today. Casey Matthews, we talked about San Antonio in the Final Four. He's on his way down there as we speak, so we wish him safe travels. He'll rejoin us next week here on the Roll Jays podcast with the Big East Energy Network. We appreciate you joining. Don't forget to subscribe to the Big East Energy Podcast Network here on YouTube. You can also follow our channel on the page as well. And again, just a reminder, if you are a Big East podcast and would be interested in joining the Big East Energy Network, we'd love to talk to you, discuss exactly how you could do that. For Alex Drake, I've been Jimmy Allen. Thanks for joining us. Go Jays. We'll see you next week.